Hey, amazing legends. Just a quick welcome and a massive thank you to you guys that tune in all the time. Let's smash the like button on this vid if you enjoy these creepy stories.
It's free and it really helps our small team out. I still don't know how to explain what happened. It's hard to make people believe something so insane without sounding like you're exaggerating or just a little too dramatic. But trust me when I say what happened with Sierra. It was not something I could make up if I tried. This whole mess started after I broke up with her. Yeah, the classic ex who can't take a hint. But what Sierra did was next level crazy, and I still get chills thinking about it. So, it all started on a normal day. I was doing my usual scroll through Facebook when I noticed a friend request from someone with a name I didn't recognize. Weird, but not all that surprising since I get random requests from time to time. But this time something fell off. The profile picture was blurry and the name was just generic. No posts, no friends, just a couple of mutual friends. I hesitated but accepted anyway. A few minutes later, I get a message from this random account. The message was short and simple. Hey, we should talk. I know everything about you. I didn't respond. Thought it was a bot or a spam account. But over the next few weeks, I started getting more and more friend requests from other accounts that looked just like this one. All empty profiles, all random names, all sending me weird messages, saying things like, "You think you can just get away with this?" Or, "You're not going to be happy for long." It was starting to freak me out. I had no idea what was going on, but I felt like someone was watching me. I started blocking the accounts, but it didn't help. It just kept coming one after the other like there was no end to it. Every time I thought I got rid of one, another would pop up within hours. At first, I thought maybe it was just a bunch of trolls or even some sort of social media prank. But then one night, I got a message that stopped me dead in my tracks. It was from one of the new accounts, and the message was something along the lines of, "Why did you lie to everyone? You think no one will notice. Sierra is going to make sure you regret this." I had no idea what the hell that meant. Sierra was my ex. We'd broken up a few months ago, and I thought things ended on somewhat decent terms. Sure, it was a messy breakup, but nothing out of the ordinary. I didn't even know how she would know what was going on in my life. After the breakup, I made sure to block her everywhere. Instagram, Facebook, even Snapchat. But somehow Sierra had found a way back in. She was sending me these bizarre, cryptic messages through random accounts, and every time I blocked one, it was like a new one appeared. Soon, it wasn't just messages, it was posts, public ones. She started creating new profiles and then tagging me in posts that made it seem like I was some sort of terrible person. She'd say stuff like, "I can't believe you would do this to me after everything I've done for him." And then she'd go on to say things about me that were completely made up, accusations I couldn't even begin to understand. It didn't stop there. One day, I logged onto Facebook and found that she had somehow gained access to my friend list. She started messaging all of my contacts, sending them twisted versions of our relationship. She'd tell my friends that I had cheated on her, or that I was a manipulative liar, or that I was playing everyone around me like a fool. Some of my closest friends actually reached out to me asking if any of this was true. And it wasn't just that they were confused, they were worried about me, like I was the one who had done something wrong. I couldn't explain it. I didn't know how she was getting to these people, but there she was making me look like the worst person in the world. Every time I tried to defend myself, she'd just block me from her new accounts and create another one. And then I would wake up to find more of my friends messaging me, asking why I was causing all this drama. I started getting paranoid. Every time I checked my notifications, there would be another comment, another message, another person asking why I was so messed up. I had no idea what she was telling them, but I could only imagine. She was a master manipulator, always playing the victim, and now it was like she had some weird power over my entire social circle. My life was starting to feel like a living nightmare, and I couldn't escape it. It was around this time that things started to get even weirder. One evening, I got a message from a new account that was clearly her, but she wasn't hiding it this time. She flat out told me she was going to ruin me, not just with my friends, but with my family too. I thought it was a joke at first, but then a couple of days later, my mom called me, asking if everything was okay. Apparently, Sierra had contacted her. She'd sent my mom an email, saying things like I was dangerous and unpredictable. She even went as far as to send my mom pictures from our relationship, highlighting moments that looked questionable if you didn't know the full story. That was when I realized this wasn't just some petty online drama. Sierra had completely lost her mind. She had no boundaries. She was willing to drag everyone into her sick little game to make me suffer. It wasn't enough that she was messing with my friendships. Now she was trying to tear my family apart. I had to do something. But what? She was hiding behind so many fake accounts. I didn't even know where to begin. I tried reaching out to Facebook, but they gave me the typical "we can't do anything unless you have proof of harassment" response. What was I supposed to do? Screenshot every single message and post. I was too overwhelmed. Eventually, after weeks of this insanity, things started to slow down. I never found out why or how Sierra finally stopped, but the damage was done. She had infected my entire social life, and even though she wasn't sending me messages anymore, I still couldn't shake the feeling that she was lurking somewhere waiting to strike again. To this day, I'm still cautious about who I accept as a friend on social media. I never really trusted anyone the same way again. I know there are people out there who still believe Sierra's twisted version of things. And honestly, I don't even know what she's up to now. She might still be out there, making fake accounts, talking about me behind my back. Who knows? But one thing's for sure, I'll never forget what she did, and I'll never let anyone that close again. It's like I woke up from a nightmare only to realize the damage it left behind was real. And no matter what I do, I can't undo it. I don't even know where to start with this because honestly, it's so messed up that it still feels like something out of a movie. But it happened. I was just trying to enjoy a normal night with a new girl I met and my ex, Savina. Decided to show up and completely destroy everything. Let me rewind a bit. So I've been seeing this girl, Elizabeth, for a couple of weeks. Things were going well, like really well. We clicked, had great conversations, and the chemistry was undeniable. We decided to go out for dinner, just a casual thing. Nothing crazy, just some burgers at this cozy little spot downtown. I was excited. I mean, Elizabeth was amazing and I hadn't felt that good on a date in a while. We get to the restaurant and things are going fine. We're talking, laughing, everything's relaxed. But then, out of nowhere, I feel this weird sensation. Like, when someone's staring at you, it's just a little too intense. I looked around the place trying to figure out where the weird vibe was coming from. And that's when I saw her. Davina. I don't know why, but it felt like time slowed down. She was sitting at a table across the room, staring straight at us, and I could see the expression on her face, like this mix of anger and honestly jealousy. I didn't think much of it at first. I mean, we broke up months ago. I hadn't seen her much since then. I had heard rumors she was dating someone new, but I wasn't even concerned. But the longer I looked at her, the more I realized she wasn't just glancing at us. She was watching us. Now, normally I just ignore it, but there was something about the way she was looking at Elizabeth that sent a cold wave over me. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was being paranoid, but then Davina stood up. I didn't know what to do. I wasn't even sure what she was planning, but I knew it wasn't going to be good. Elizabeth didn't notice yet. She was busy laughing at something I'd said, so I just kept my eyes on Davina, trying to figure out where this was going. She walked straight toward our table. Before I could even process it, she was right there. Out of nowhere, she reached over and grabbed my water glass. She didn't say a word, but in one swift motion, she threw it all over Elizabeth's face. Elizabeth froze. Her face, her hair, everything. Soak. I didn't even know how to react. What the hell was happening? I stood up immediately, but Davina was faster. She grabbed Elizabeth by the hair. I'm not even exaggerating. It wasn't just a little yank, it was a full-on aggressive pull. Elizabeth screamed, trying to get away, but Davina just held on. I tried to pull Davina off her, but she was so worked up, her grip was like iron. The whole restaurant went quiet. People were staring, and I could feel every pair of eyes on us. I wanted to yell at her to tell her to stop, but I was in complete shock. Why was she doing this? We hadn't even been together for months. She had no right to act like this. I finally got a grip on Davina's arm and yanked her away from Elizabeth. She stumbled back, but she was still breathing heavily, looking like she was ready to attack again. I turned to Elizabeth, who was visibly shaken, her face red from the cold water and her hair a mess. She was crying, just trying to catch her breath, and I felt like the biggest idiot in the world. I tried to calm her down, asking if she was okay, but I could tell this wasn't just about the water or the hair pulling anymore. This was about the fact that Davina had invaded my life, my new life, like some kind of twisted ghost. It was like she couldn't stand the thought of me being happy with someone else. I wanted to turn to Davina and tell her off, but honestly, at that point, I was more worried about getting Elizabeth out of there than dealing with whatever insanity was going on in Davina's head. I led Elizabeth to the door, trying to avoid making any more of a scene. I kept glancing back at Davina, expecting her to chase us, but she didn't. She just stood there, staring at me with that look in her eyes like she had won some sort of sick victory. When we got to the car, I apologized over and over again, but Elizabeth didn't say much. She was just quiet. I hated myself for putting her in that situation, especially when it was supposed to be a fun, simple date, but I had no idea how to handle what had just happened. I was still trying to process it. Elizabeth didn't want to go home right away, so I took her to a nearby park. We sat in silence for a while. I wanted to make things right, but it felt like everything I said was falling flat. I wasn't sure if she was mad at me or just in shock, but either way, it was obvious that things had changed. Eventually, she spoke. She told me she didn't think she could see me again. She was too scared. She didn't know if that was going to happen again, if Davina would show up like that again, and I couldn't blame her. I tried to tell her that I'd make sure it didn't happen again, that Davina had no place in my life anymore, but I think the damage was already done. I could see it in her eyes. She was done. As she got out of the car and walked away, I couldn't help but feel the weight of it all. I wanted to scream to make Davina understand what she'd done, but what was the point? She wouldn't care. I was just another guy to mess with, another pawn in her game. I couldn't undo what had happened. I didn't hear from Elizabeth after that night. A few texts, a couple of calls, but nothing. And Davina? I've seen her around town a couple of times since then, but she doesn't even look at me. It's like she got what she wanted and moved on, leaving a mess behind for me to clean up. I haven't seen or heard from Elizabeth in months now, and I don't blame her. After what happened, I don't even know if I'd be able to go back to a relationship that could end like that. And as for Davina, I have no idea what her deal is, but I'm pretty sure she's still out there somewhere, still watching, still lurking, just waiting for the next opportunity to ruin someone's life. Honestly, I don't know what's worse, the chaos she caused in that one moment, or the way she's made me second guess everything I thought I knew about love. So, I've got this insane story about my friend Pete's ex, Courtney. I still can't believe what happened, and honestly, it still makes me uncomfortable to think about it. I've never had someone go that far just to get my attention and mess with my head. I'm not saying I'm some kind of saint or anything, but this whole thing was just wild. Okay, so let's start from the beginning. Pete and Courtney had been together for almost a year, and I'd known them both for a while. We all hung out in the same group of friends, and they always seemed happy enough. Though, to be honest, I could tell things were a little off between them toward the end. Pete was a good guy, genuine, always had your back. And Courtney, well, she was a bit, well, let's just say she didn't always seem to have the best intentions. But I'd never really paid attention to it, since I was more focused on my own stuff. Then, out of nowhere, Pete and Courtney broke up. I didn't get the full details, but from what I gathered, it wasn't pretty. Pete was pretty shaken up about it, but he was trying to move on. It was a bit awkward, but the group of friends tried to stay cool. Courtney, though, she didn't seem as ready to move on as Pete did, and that's where everything started to get weird. A couple of weeks after the breakup, I started noticing Courtney around more. Not like she was hanging with Pete or anything. She just started showing up at places I was at. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe she was just trying to figure things out, and I didn't want to be rude, so I talked to her a little keep it casual. But then things started to shift. She'd start sitting next to me more, laughing a little too hard at my jokes, touching my arm a little longer than necessary. I honestly didn't even think it was that big of a deal at first. Maybe she was just lonely, or maybe she was looking for someone to talk to. Then she started texting me. At first, I thought it was just a casual, hey, how's it going type thing. But after a while, the messages got weirder. It was like she was fishing for compliments, sending me stuff like, you're so funny, I love hanging out with you, or I wish I could find someone like you. I'll admit it was flattering at first. I mean, I'm not used to getting attention like that, especially from someone who'd been with Pete for so long. But then the more she did it, the more I started to feel uncomfortable. It wasn't just the messages. It was the way she acted around me in person. One time we were all out at a bar with the group, and she sat down next to me. She was leaning into me like she was trying to get close. It was awkward, and I was doing my best to not make a big deal out of it. But it wasn't just the physical stuff. It was the way she talked to me. She started asking questions like, do you think Pete ever cared about me? Or why do you think we didn't work out? It was starting to feel like she was trying to get inside my head, and I really didn't know how to handle it. The turning point came when she invited me out to lunch, just the two of us. At first, I thought it was just a casual hangout, but when we met up, she started acting completely different. She was talking to me in this flirty way, and it was making me really uncomfortable. I didn't know how to get out of it, so I just went along with it, hoping it would end soon. But then she said something that caught me off guard. She told me that she had always liked me, even when she and Pete were together. I didn't know how to respond to that. It felt like a bomb had just dropped in my lap. I thought maybe she was just venting, or maybe she was drunk, but no, she was dead serious. The entire time, I kept thinking, what the hell is going on here? It didn't take a genius to figure out what she was doing. Then things escalated even further. She started showing up at places where I'd be with Pete, and that's when I realized something. She wasn't just trying to get with me. She was trying to make Pete jealous. I'm talking about full-on sabotage. One night, we were at a party, and she kept eyeing me the entire time. Every time Pete turned his back, she'd make some kind of move. She'd stand too close. She'd make comments that were clearly meant to get his attention. It was like she was deliberately trying to ruin things, not just for Pete, but for me too. I got fed up, and I confronted her about it. I told her I didn't want any part of whatever game she was playing. She looked at me like I was the one being unreasonable. She said she was just trying to have some fun, and that she didn't mean to make things weird. But when I pushed her further, that's when she finally admitted the truth. She wasn't interested in me at all. She just wanted to make Pete jealous. I was stunned. It felt like I'd just been a pawn in some sick little game, and I didn't even realize it. She wasn't looking for a relationship or anything serious. She was just trying to mess with Pete's head. She told me she was having fun with all the drama, watching everything spiral. It was like she was addicted to the chaos she was causing. She even admitted that it made her feel powerful to see Pete get upset and be caught in the middle. It was the most twisted thing I had ever heard. I was done at that point. I didn't want any part of whatever Courtney was trying to drag me into. I told her to stay away from me, and that if she ever did anything like that again, I'd tell Pete everything. She acted like she didn't care, but I could see the frustration on her face. I wasn't playing her game anymore. After that, I cut ties with Courtney. I didn't want to deal with her manipulative nonsense. I never told Pete exactly what went down. Honestly, I wasn't sure if it was worth the drama, and I didn't want to make things worse for him. But I knew I had to get out of that mess before things got any crazier. It was honestly one of the most bizarre situations I've ever found myself in, and I'm just thankful I got out of it before anything worse happened. Courtney's behavior was on a whole different level of crazy, and I can't even begin to understand what was going through her mind. But I learned one thing. If someone's trying to make your life miserable just to get a reaction from someone else, it's best to cut them off before they drag you down with them. So here's the thing. I thought I was done with Hannah. I had ended things with her months ago after realizing how controlling she was. I had spent months just trying to get out from under her constant surveillance and manipulation. I moved to a new city to escape all of that, to get away from the chaos she had created in my life. I needed peace, and for a while, I thought I had it. But nothing can ever stay simple, can it? I moved into a small apartment on the edge of town. It wasn't anything special, but it was cozy enough for me. I liked the location, quiet, low-key. It was a fresh start, or at least that's what I thought. I spent the first few weeks unpacking, setting up my space, getting used to the new routine. It felt good. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had control over my life again. But then I started noticing little things. It wasn't obvious at first, just small, insignificant things that might be explained away. A drawer not fully closing. A pen out of place on my desk. At first, I thought it was just me being paranoid, adjusting to the new space maybe. But as the days went by, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. One day, while I was cleaning out one of the closets, I found something wedged in the back corner. It was a tiny black object, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. It didn't make sense at first, but when I picked it up, I realized it was a camera. A hidden camera. A little piece of tech that blended perfectly into the corner, one that I definitely didn't put there. My stomach dropped. I felt sick, like I'd been punched in the gut. It wasn't just the fact that there was a camera hidden in my apartment. It was that it had been there all along. I tried to stay calm, but my mind was racing. How long had it been there? Who put it there, and why? I grabbed my laptop, trying to steady my hands. I plugged the camera in and opened up the footage. I was shaking, my fingers barely able to hit the right keys. As the video played, I felt a wave of nausea hit me. The footage started playing from before I even moved in. It was showing my apartment while it was still empty, the room in pristine condition, untouched by any furniture. The camera was running even before I was there. But it wasn't just that. As I skipped through the footage, my stomach sank lower and lower. Anna was there. I saw her. She had been inside my apartment multiple times, watching me. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. She was in the background of the footage, walking through my living room, going through my things while I wasn't there. It looked like she was making herself at home, like she had a right to be there. The worst part was that the footage wasn't just a one-off. It wasn't just a camera capturing a random moment. It was clear that the camera had been recording every single time I left the apartment. And it wasn't just that she'd been in the apartment. She had been watching me. She knew everything about my routine, everything I did. Every time I left the apartment, she'd slip in. I watched as she moved through the space like it was hers, touching my things, going through my drawers, my closet, even taking things. It was like she was trying to make herself part of my life again, even after I told her to leave me alone. I couldn't breathe. My head was spinning. What the hell was she doing? Why would she do this? Hadn't she been enough of a nightmare already? I couldn't wrap my mind around it. I thought I was done with her. I thought moving was going to be the end of it. But here she was, still invading my life in ways I couldn't even begin to understand. The footage went on for days. There was one clip where she was sitting in my living room, eating food that I had left out on the counter like it was normal. Another clip showed her using my shower, the camera catching glimpses of her as she slipped in and out of the bathroom while I was gone. It felt like a violation in every possible way. The more I watched, the more sickened I became. I had to stop. I couldn't watch anymore. I felt like I was drowning in it. The thought of her being in my space, touching my things while I was oblivious, it was terrifying. I knew I couldn't just keep sitting here watching her invade my life. I called the landlord immediately and had them come over to check everything. I needed to know how she had gotten in and if there were any other cameras hidden. The landlord had a maintenance guy check all the closets, vents, and corners. We found 2 more cameras hidden in the vents, one in the bedroom and one in the kitchen. It made me sick to my stomach. How had she done all this without me noticing? How long had she been planning this? The landlord said they'd take care of the cameras and change the locks, but it didn't change the fact that Anna had been in my life, hiding in plain sight. I couldn't stop thinking about all the times she'd been in my apartment, even before I knew it was happening. The fact that she had been watching me, knowing my every move without me ever being aware. It was more than just creepy. It was horrifying. I still don't know how she managed to do it, how she knew where I'd moved, how she found my apartment. The cameras were small enough to be hidden in plain sight, and it made me think back to all the times I felt like I was being watched, all the little things that didn't make sense. But at that point, it didn't matter how she did it. What mattered was that she had done it. I don't know where Anna is now. I changed my number, moved again, and made sure to be as discreet as possible. But I know one thing for sure, she's still out there, watching me from somewhere. And I'll never feel truly safe again. I'm still trying to wrap my head around what happened that night. I don't know what I was thinking when I let Dave into my life, but this whole thing was next level insane. I've had my share of bad breakups, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened with him. I guess I should start from the beginning. Dave and I had been together for a little over a year. At first, everything seemed perfect. He was charming, always had a way of making me laugh, and he seemed like a genuinely nice guy. But over time, things started to shift. He became possessive. He'd get weirdly jealous whenever I'd hang out with my friends, and he'd always want to know where I was, what I was doing, and who I was with. I brushed it off at first, thinking maybe it was just him caring too much. But then the controlling stuff started. That's when I knew something wasn't right. We broke up about 6 months ago, and honestly, I was relieved. It had gotten to the point where I was constantly walking on eggshells around him, and I knew I couldn't keep living like that. It wasn't pretty, but I was firm about it. And after a few weeks, I thought I was finally free. I'd even started dating someone new, Alex. We'd been hanging out a lot, and it felt nice to feel normal again. But then Dave decided to show up. One night, I was sitting in my room scrolling through my phone after a long day. My window was open, the cool breeze drifting in. The night felt peaceful like any other, but then out of nowhere, my phone buzzed. I checked it expecting a message from Alex or maybe a friend, but what I saw froze me. It was a picture of me, taken from outside my window. I felt my stomach drop as I stared at the photo. It was blurry, but I could tell it was me sitting in my room, just like I had been a few minutes before. The angle was off, but it was clear someone had taken it from just outside my window. My first thought was that I must have been imagining things, that I was just being paranoid. But then the next message came in. It was the same picture, but this time with a message. I'm watching you. I freaked out. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I couldn't think straight. I didn't know what to do. It wasn't like I could just go outside and confront whoever did it. Whoever had taken that photo knew exactly where I lived, and that thought made my skin crawl. I grabbed my phone and looked at the sender's number. It was from an unknown number, but I knew immediately who it was. There was only one person who would be this messed up. Dave. I felt like I couldn't breathe. I was in a panic. I locked the window and quickly pulled the blinds down, trying to convince myself that it was just a coincidence. But I knew it wasn't. I knew Dave was capable of something like this. He'd always had a way of making me feel like I couldn't escape him, even when we weren't together anymore. I tried to call him, but it went straight to voicemail. My mind was racing. I couldn't stay in my room, but I didn't know where to go or what to do. I couldn't even tell Alex about this, not yet. He would freak out, and I didn't want him to get involved, not until I figured out what was going on. I called the police. I didn't know what else to do. I told them about the photos, about Dave, and about how I felt unsafe. The dispatcher took everything down and promised me they'd send someone over as soon as possible. I hung up, but I still couldn't calm down. My whole body was shaking, and I kept imagining Dave outside, just waiting for me to make a move. I didn't want to stay alone, so I texted a friend to come over. I told them it was an emergency, and thankfully they came over right away. I didn't even care about the mess in my room at that point. I just needed someone with me. My friend arrived about 20 minutes later, and I could tell they were worried just by the look on their face. I explained everything about the pictures, the message, and how freaked out I was. They told me to stay calm and that the police would figure it out. Not long after that, I heard a knock on my door. My heart skipped a beat. The police had arrived. They came inside, and I showed them the photos and the messages. They asked if I had any idea how Dave might have gotten close enough to take a picture of me without me noticing. I told them about the window, that it was open, and that it was possible he had climbed up to my second-floor window. The officers took all the details down, telling me they'd need to investigate and that they would keep a patrol car in the area for the next few hours. I stayed at my friend's place that night. It felt safer, even though I was still on edge. Every little noise made me jump. I kept thinking about the picture, about how Dave had somehow been watching me, and about how I couldn't even trust my own safety in my own home anymore. The next day, the police contacted me with an update. They traced the unknown number back to a burner phone, which wasn't much of a surprise. But then they told me something I didn't expect. They found evidence that Dave had been hanging around my neighborhood the night before, near my apartment. He had been lurking just outside my window, waiting for the right moment to snap that photo. Apparently, he'd been doing it for a while. They showed me footage from nearby security cameras that had caught him in the area at different times. He'd been coming around for weeks, watching me, waiting for the perfect opportunity to scare me. I was shaken. I felt violated, like I was living in some kind of nightmare. The police assured me they'd file a restraining order against Dave and that he'd be in serious trouble if he showed up again. But honestly, even with all the legal stuff, I couldn't shake the feeling that Dave was still out there, lurking somewhere. I never heard from him directly after that night. He vanished like he always did when things got too real. But I still can't forget the feeling of being watched, of knowing someone had been so close without me even realizing it. The whole thing left me with this sense of dread that I still can't shake. I still double-check my windows before bed, and I still get a little uneasy when I'm alone in my apartment. I don't know what's scarier, the fact that Dave did all that, or the realization that I might never feel completely safe again. Alright, this one's gonna be a doozy. I've never told anyone about this before, but it's honestly something I can't get out of my head. It was one of those situations where everything was messed up in ways I didn't even think were possible, and it was all because of my ex Diana. So, we had been together for a few years. It wasn't the perfect relationship, but I guess I thought it was okay for the most part. We went through a lot of ups and downs, but eventually I realized I was done. The whole thing was just too draining. She was controlling, manipulative, and honestly, a bit unhinged at times. I tried to break it off a couple of times, but every time I did, she'd pull some crazy stunt to make me feel guilty and take her back. The last time we broke up, I was pretty firm about it. I had enough of the games, the drama, and the emotional roller coaster. I wanted to move on and start fresh. I had no interest in going back to that chaos, and I knew that if I did, I'd just be stuck in this never-ending cycle. So I cut all ties, blocked her on everything, and didn't give her any reason to think I'd changed my mind. It should have been over, but Diana clearly didn't agree with that. A couple of weeks later, I was at my parents' house, just chilling like any other day. I was having a normal conversation with my mom in the kitchen when the doorbell rang. I went to answer it, and standing there was Diana. I was shocked, honestly. I hadn't seen her in a while, and I definitely wasn't expecting her to show up at my parents' house. She was standing there with this fake smile plastered on her face, looking all nervous but also weirdly excited. I didn't even let her in. I asked her what she was doing there, and she just told me that she needed to talk to my parents. I had a bad feeling instantly. Diana was never someone to do things like that without some hidden motive. But before I could stop her, she barged in. And what happened next was honestly one of the most bizarre, disturbing things I've ever had to deal with. She went straight to the living room where my parents were watching TV, and she started talking about us, about how we were getting back together, how we were working things out. And then, without any hesitation, she dropped the bombshell. She told my parents that she was pregnant. I swear to God, I almost had a heart attack. She said that we were going to have a baby and that it was the best thing that could ever happen to us. My parents were sitting there absolutely thrilled. My mom was already tearing up, saying how happy she was for us, and my dad was over there smiling like he had just won the lottery. The entire time I stood frozen in the doorway, not sure whether I should say something or just back away and pretend I wasn't witnessing this absolute mess. Now, I'll be honest, I had no idea what to do. I knew she was lying. There was no way she was pregnant, but my parents didn't know that. They didn't know how much of a disaster our relationship had been, or how much Diana had screwed with my head when we were together. They didn't know about all the manipulation and the way she made me feel trapped. But I knew if I didn't say something soon, they were going to be totally convinced, and that was going to make it a whole lot harder to get out of. So I walked into the living room and interrupted her little speech. I wasn't trying to be a jerk, but I had to shut this down fast. I told my parents that there was no way she was pregnant, that she was just trying to mess with everyone's heads again, and that she had absolutely no reason to be there. My parents' faces went from joy to confusion in about 2 seconds. My mom looked at me like I had just crushed her dreams, and my dad's face turned stone cold serious. Diana, of course, tried to backpedal. She claimed she had a test, but I knew she was lying through her teeth. At that point, it was clear she wasn't there to tell the truth. She was there to get me back, to pull me back into her web of lies and manipulation. But I wasn't about to let that happen. I looked at Diana, and I just said no. I wasn't going to let her ruin my relationship with my parents. She wasn't going to make me feel guilty, and she wasn't going to trick me into getting back together with her. I told her to leave, and I told my parents the whole story. I didn't hold anything back. I told them about how controlling Diana had been, how manipulative she was, and how she was always playing these crazy mind games. It wasn't easy, but it was the truth. I had to get them to understand what was really going on. Once she left, I sat down with my parents and explained everything in more detail. They were upset, obviously, but they understood why I'd cut ties with her. It took some time to process, but they eventually got it. It was still incredibly awkward for the next few days. My mom kept asking if I was sure Diana wasn't pregnant, even though she knew deep down that she was lying. My dad didn't say much, but I could tell he was pissed about how Diana had tried to manipulate him too. What bothered me the most was that Diana had gone so far as to lie to my parents. She wasn't even trying to win me back by being sincere. She was trying to play this huge mind game, making them believe something that wasn't true just so she could get me to feel guilty and cave. The whole thing made me feel sick. I knew I needed to get even further away from her, and after that stunt, I completely cut her out of my life for good. I blocked her on everything, and I didn't respond to any of her messages. It was like she had no boundaries, no shame. And honestly, I was just glad I had finally seen her for who she really was before it went any further. Looking back, I'm not sure what kind of person she thought she was fooling, but I'm just relieved that I was strong enough to stand up for myself and my family. It was one of the most bizarre, uncomfortable, and disturbing experiences I've ever had, and I just pray I never have to deal with anything like it again. I don't even know where to begin with this one. I've been avoiding thinking about it for months, but it's like the whole thing keeps creeping back into my head. This wasn't just a bad breakup. It was a nightmare that went on for way too long. Jason and I were together for over a year. We met through mutual friends, and at first, it was everything you'd want in a relationship. Fun dates, lots of laughs, no drama. But then, over time, things started to change. He became more possessive, more paranoid. It started with small things like constantly texting me to ask where I was or who I was with. Then, it escalated to him showing up uninvited, asking for all my passwords, and constantly questioning me about every little thing. I didn't notice it at first, or when I did, it was hard to ignore. I tried breaking up with him a few times, but each time he'd beg, cry, promise that he'd change. He'd show up at my place with flowers or write me these long, dramatic texts apologizing for his behavior. And every time, I feel guilty and end up giving him another chance. The cycle was exhausting. But after months of dealing with the same thing, I finally had enough. I ended things for good and told him there was no chance of us getting back together. He took it about as well as you'd expect. At first, he was devastated. I thought he'd eventually get the message. Little did I know, I had no idea how far he was willing to go to force me back into this life. It started with a knocking. At first, it wasn't too bad. Jason would show up at my door a few times a week, just standing outside, knocking and knocking. He didn't say anything, just stood there crying. Sometimes he'd be there for hours, making me feel guilty for not letting him in. I didn't even know what to do. I'd ignore it, hoping he'd eventually get the hint, but he never did. One night, I was in bed watching TV when I heard the familiar sound of someone knocking at my door. It was late, around 10:30, and I had no idea who it could be. When I opened the door, there he was, Jason. He was standing there with red eyes, tears running down his face. He didn't even say anything. He just looked at me, hoping I'd invite him in like everything was normal again. I was already over it, so I told him to leave. I didn't want to hear his apologies or his promises anymore. I knew he wasn't going to change, and I had to stick to my decision. But he didn't leave. Instead, he stood there, crying harder, begging me to take him back. I couldn't deal with it, so I slammed the door in his face. But that didn't stop him. The next day, he was back, and the day after that, and the day after that. It became a routine, me trying to go on with my life, and him showing up at my door, crying and begging. Sometimes he'd bring gifts, like chocolates or a bottle of wine, but I never took them. He wouldn't even acknowledge when I told him to leave. It was like he thought if he just kept showing up, I'd eventually cave. It kept getting worse, too. The knocking turned into pounding. The crying turned into yelling. Sometimes I'd wake up to find him sitting on the porch, waiting for me. I couldn't escape it. Every time I thought he had finally given up, he'd come back with even more desperation. Then one day, things escalated to a point I couldn't have predicted. I was sitting in my living room, scrolling through my phone when I heard the loudest bang against my door. At first, I thought it was just him knocking again, but then the sound came again, even harder this time. I stood up, confused, and rushed to the door. That's when I saw him, Jason, standing there, looking absolutely unhinged. His eyes were wild, his clothes were disheveled, and he was breathing heavily. I didn't have time to react before he raised his foot and kicked the door, sending it flying off its hinges. I didn't know what to do. He was inside now, and I could see the look in his eyes. He wasn't just crying anymore. He was completely desperate. It was like he had snapped, and I was the only one who could fix it. He didn't say a word. He just fell to his knees in front of me, hands clutching my legs, begging me to take him back. He was crying harder than I'd ever seen before. At that moment, I realized how far he was willing to go to keep me in his life. He had broken into my house, destroyed my door, and now he was pleading with me like I was his only hope. I felt a sick feeling in my stomach. This wasn't love. This wasn't even a breakup anymore. It was manipulation, pure and simple. I told him to leave again, but he wouldn't. He just kept repeating that he couldn't live without me, that we were meant to be together, that I was the only person who could make him happy. His words started to blur together. It was like I was listening to a broken record, and no matter how many times I told him no, he didn't hear me. I tried to push him away, but he wouldn't let go. He held onto my legs, crying harder than ever, and it felt like I was stuck in this nightmare that wouldn't end. The whole thing felt unreal. I couldn't believe it was happening. I'd never felt more trapped in my life. Finally, I managed to get him to leave by calling the cops. They showed up within minutes, and when they saw the door, they knew immediately what had happened. Jason was arrested on the spot for breaking and entering. I couldn't believe it. I knew he was unstable, but I never thought it would come to this. After everything settled down, I had to get the door fixed, and the whole experience left me feeling shaken for weeks. I changed all my locks and made sure I never gave him another chance to get close again. I couldn't risk it. I was done for good. I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't called the cops. I don't even want to think about it. But Jason's actions left a scar on me that's still there. It's a reminder of how far some people will go when they don't want to accept that it's over. That whole situation just proved to me how far things can spiral when you're dealing with someone who can't take no for an answer. It's terrifying to think about, and I'm just thankful I got out of it when I did. This is a story I've been keeping to myself for a while. I've shared it with a few close friends, but I can never shake the feeling that I'm still being watched, so I haven't gone into much detail publicly. But I can't let it linger in my mind anymore. I have to get it out. What happened to me with my ex, Emily, still messes with me to this day, and even now I'll sometimes check over my shoulder when I walk home alone at night. When we first broke up, it wasn't even a dramatic thing. It was the usual we'd grown apart situation. We'd been together for a little over a year, and honestly, it just wasn't working anymore. Emily was sweet, but she had some serious issues with boundaries, and I started feeling like I couldn't breathe. So I made it clear to her that I was done. She seemed upset at first, but I didn't think anything of it. I mean, we were both adults, and we had both been through breakups before. At first, everything was fine. There were a few awkward texts here and there, but that's normal after a breakup, right? The "I miss you" texts, the "hope you're doing okay" ones, but I just brushed them off. I didn't think much of it at the time. It wasn't until a couple weeks later when things started getting weird. It started with late night texts. I'd be sitting at home scrolling through my phone, and suddenly I'd get a message from Emily. It wasn't anything threatening or scary, just random stuff. She'd tell me about her day, ask if I'd seen a certain show, or mention something she thought I might like. But what made me uncomfortable wasn't the content. It was the timing. They were always sent around midnight or 1 o'clock a.m. when I'd be lying in bed trying to fall asleep. It felt like she knew exactly when I'd be vulnerable, just waiting for that moment to reach out. I tried to ignore it, but after a week of this, I started getting a little concerned. I asked her to stop. I told her I needed space and I wanted to move on with my life. She apologized and said she understood, but the texts kept coming. They didn't stop after that. In fact, it just got more persistent. One night, I checked my phone to find a message from her that didn't sit right with me. It was a simple, "I saw you today," with a smiling emoji attached. I froze, staring at the message. What did she mean by that? I hadn't seen her in weeks. I scrolled up through our conversation, hoping I had missed something, but there was nothing. That's when I realized something was off. She wasn't just texting me, she was tracking me. I pulled up my phone's location settings and saw it, an app I didn't recognize with her name next to it. The app was called Find My Friends, but it wasn't something I had ever agreed to share with her. I hadn't even thought to check my location settings before. That's when I started scrolling through our messages from the past few months. To my horror, I saw that Emily had been sending me detailed texts about my whereabouts. Not just, "Hey, hope you're having a good day," but things like, "I saw you at the grocery store yesterday," or "It looked like you were having a fun time at that concert on Friday." The worst part was realizing that she had been sending these messages for weeks, maybe longer. Every time I'd been out, every time I'd done something, she had known where I was. I couldn't breathe for a second. I just stared at my phone, horrified at what I was seeing. I immediately went to my phone's location settings and disabled the app. I didn't know how long she'd been tracking me, but I knew I had to stop it before it went any further. But that wasn't the end of it. Oh no. The next day, I came home from work, feeling already on edge, and as I pulled up to my apartment, I noticed something strange. My front door was slightly ajar. At first, I thought I had forgotten to lock it, but as I stepped closer, I saw a figure sitting on my porch. It was Emily. She was just sitting there, smiling like nothing was wrong, like she had never left. She didn't even look like she had been waiting for long. Her clothes were neat, and her hair was still styled, as if she had been planning this moment for days. I felt my stomach drop. My heart started racing, and for a second, I thought I might pass out right there on the spot. I didn't know what to do. She had just shown up. How did she know where I lived? I hadn't even told her I'd moved to this new apartment, but somehow she had found me. I tried to stay calm. I didn't want to escalate things, but I knew I had to get her to leave. I asked her what she was doing here, but she just smiled at me like I was a crazy one. It was like she was completely out of touch with reality. She told me that she was there to talk, that she just missed me, and that she wanted to make sure I was okay. I asked her to leave, but she just stayed there and not moving an inch. She wouldn't leave. I don't know how long we stood there, me at the doorway, feeling trapped in my own home, and her sitting there like everything was fine. I finally had no choice but to call my roommate and have them call the police. I couldn't deal with this anymore. By the time the police arrived, Emily was still sitting on the porch, still smiling. She didn't even try to resist when the officers asked her to leave. They told me I should get a restraining order, which, looking back, I should have done right then and there. But it wasn't over. She didn't just go away. After that, I started getting calls from blocked numbers, sometimes late at night, sometimes during the day. When I picked up, no one would say anything, just dead silence. It's like she was always there, lingering in the background of my life, waiting for her next move. It took months before things started to feel like they were back to normal. I had to move again, change my number, and block her on every social media account. It's been almost a year since I last heard from her, but every now and then I'll get that uneasy feeling like someone's watching me, and I'll double check my surroundings. I've never told anyone the full story, not even my closest friends. But if you're reading this and you're going through something similar, trust your gut. Don't let someone back into your life just because they're persistent. Because once they start crossing boundaries, it can get way worse than you ever imagined. I don't know why I still think about it sometimes. I mean, it's been over a year now, and I swear, every time I look at my phone and see a number I don't recognize, my heart skips a beat. It's like I'm always waiting for it to happen again, for Alexa to somehow find her way back into my life. But the thing is, I haven't heard from her in over a year, until that night. That night is burned into my memory like a nightmare I can never wake up from. It was a normal evening at first. I'd just gotten home from work, tossed my keys on the table, and sat down to scroll through my phone. I was trying to unwind, maybe watch a few TikToks or check the group chat, anything to distract me from the stress of the day. I was just about to scroll past a notification when I froze. There on my screen was her name, Alexa. I blinked a couple of times, thinking I was dreaming or that maybe I had just looked at an old message or something. But no, it was her. I hadn't heard from her in over a year, not a word. And now, out of nowhere, her name was lighting up my phone like she had just called me a few minutes ago. I hesitated. I knew it was probably just some prank or a glitch. Maybe it was a number from someone else with a similar name or a spam call pretending to be her. But for some reason, I couldn't bring myself to ignore it. My hand trembled a little as I swiped to answer, almost like I had no control over it. It was stupid. I should have just let it go, but I didn't. When I picked up, her voice hit me like a ton of bricks. It wasn't normal, not even close. It sounded distorted, almost like it was coming from behind a wall or through a filter. Her words were clear, but there was something about the way she said them that made my stomach turn. "I'm still with you," she whispered, and just like that, the call ended. I sat there holding my phone, staring at the screen, trying to make sense of what had just happened. My hands were shaking, and for a moment I didn't know if I was still dreaming. I tried to tell myself it was just a weird glitch, maybe a weird app or a prank someone had set up. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. I told myself I would just block her number and move on, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Maybe it was the tone in her voice, or how it felt like she was close. Like she was in the room with me somehow. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept my phone on silent, trying to ignore the nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach. The next day, I thought it was over. I figured it was just some messed up phone call, and maybe it was nothing. Maybe I was just being paranoid. But then it happened again. I didn't even need to look at my phone to know it was her. I felt it before I even picked up. It was like she was waiting for me. And just like the night before, I answered the call, even though I knew I shouldn't. Her voice was distorted again. This time, I could barely understand what she was saying. It was like she was in a tunnel or underwater, but I could still make out the words, "I'm still here." Then the call ended abruptly. That was it. I was done. I didn't know how she was doing this, but I couldn't take it anymore. I immediately blocked the number, thinking that would be the end of it. How could she keep calling me from the same number anyway? It didn't make sense. But that's when things got worse. I blocked her number and I thought I was safe. But no matter how many times I blocked her, her number would pop up again, always with that same creepy message. "I'm still with you." It was like the calls were coming from nowhere, from some other dimension, and I had no control over it. Each time I picked up, it was her. The voice, the distortion, the same chilling words. I thought about calling the police, but what was I supposed to say? My ex is calling me from a number that keeps changing, and her voice sounds weird. I didn't even know how to explain it. It didn't make sense, but it was happening. The worst part, I started to feel like she was watching me. I'm not sure how to explain it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Alexa was always right behind me. I hear footsteps outside my door or feel like I wasn't alone when I'd be sitting in my room. It's probably just paranoia, but the whole situation felt off. I started locking the windows, double checking the doors, making sure I didn't leave anything out of place. It felt like I was living in some weird, messed up version of my life where Alexa was still there, lurking in the shadows. I couldn't even go outside without checking over my shoulder, feeling like I was being followed. My friends thought I was being dramatic. They didn't understand. They thought it was just a weird tech issue or a stalker prank that I should just let go of. But how could I? It wasn't just about the calls. It was the way she seemed to be there, like she was still a part of my life, even though I hadn't seen her in over a year. It finally reached a breaking point one night when the phone rang again. I hadn't answered it in weeks, but for some reason I decided to pick it up. Maybe I was just too tired, or maybe I thought I could handle it now. I don't know. When I heard her voice again, distorted and creepy as always, I snapped. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Why are you doing this?" But there was no answer. Just static, and then the line went dead. That was the last time I heard from her, but I haven't been the same since. The calls stopped, but I still feel her presence sometimes, like she's watching me. I still check my phone, even though I know I won't get another call. The feeling doesn't go away. Maybe it was all just in my head, a weird combination of stress and isolation. Maybe it was a tech glitch or someone messing with me. But every now and then, I'll hear her voice in the back of my mind, whispering, "I'm still with you." I don't know what it was, but I can't shake the feeling that it's not really over. I thought I was done with Amir. After the mess we made of each other's lives, I swore I'd never hear from him again. I blocked his number, deleted everything, then tried to move on. It was hard, sure, but I was determined. I couldn't let someone like him keep controlling my thoughts. I got a fresh start, a new chapter, and for a while, life felt like it was finally getting back to normal. Then, a few months later, it all crashed down on me in the worst possible way. It all started when I got a new job. It wasn't anything flashy, just a basic office gig that I thought would give me some stability and routine after the chaos of the breakup. On my first day, I walked into the office with the usual nerves. It was a small team, so I figured I'd get to know everyone quickly, just settle in and do my thing. I remember walking past the desks trying to get a feel for the space, and then I saw it. I froze. There, sitting at a desk right next to mine, was Mark. At first, I thought it was just some weird coincidence. Maybe someone had the same name as Amir's cousin, but as I walked closer, I saw the way he was looking at me. I don't know how to explain it. He wasn't just staring like anyone might. It was him. Amir. For a split second, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. I couldn't have been that unlucky, right? But no, there was no mistake. His familiar face was staring right back at me. He changed his look a little. Hair was a bit shorter, a new jacket. But it was still him, down to the way he sat at his desk, the way his eyes lingered on me when I didn't expect it. I felt my stomach drop. What was he doing here? At first, I tried to brush it off, convincing myself I was being paranoid. It had been months, after all. I blocked his number. He wasn't supposed to be in my life anymore. But every time I looked at him, I could feel the weight of his presence. It wasn't just that he was physically there, sitting next to me every day. It was the way he acted like nothing had ever happened between us. Like we hadn't spent years together, like we hadn't ended things in the most painful, toxic way possible. He pretended like he didn't know the damage he'd caused, like we were just any two coworkers who happened to be in the same office. But I knew he knew, and every time I turned to my computer or looked over at his desk, I could feel his eyes on me. It wasn't normal. It wasn't just coincidence. For weeks, I tried to ignore it. I focused on my work, avoided eye contact, and made sure to leave the office at the end of the day before he could corner me in the hallway or near the elevator. But I could feel him watching. I'd catch glimpses of him glancing at my screen or hovering a little too close whenever we'd walk by each other. Then things started getting weird. I began to notice little things. comments that didn't make sense, things that seemed too personal for him to know. One day during a meeting, he made a remark about something I had told him in passing when we were still together. I hadn't even realized he was listening when I said it, but there it was, his voice casually throwing it out there like it was no big deal. It made me uncomfortable, but I tried to brush it off. Maybe he was just trying to be friendly, or maybe he just had a weird way of remembering things. I told myself it didn't matter. Then things got worse. I was sitting at my desk one afternoon when I saw him walking toward me, his face neutral but his eyes burning with something I couldn't quite place. My heart started pounding in my chest as he stopped by my desk. For a split second, I thought maybe he was going to talk to me, ask how I was doing. But instead, he just stood there, watching. It was almost like he was waiting for me to break. I could feel the tension in the air. His presence felt like it was pressing on me, suffocating me. I stood up quickly, not wanting to be in the same space as him any longer than I had to. I pretended like I had a meeting to attend, grabbed my things, and made my escape. But that wasn't the worst part. A couple of days later, I started getting odd emails, nothing overtly threatening, but strange enough to raise my suspicion. At first, it was just generic feedback about my performance. But as the days went on, the tone of the emails changed. I started noticing errors in my work that I knew weren't there before. My coworkers started getting weird complaints about my attitude, my behavior, my deadlines. People I'd never even worked closely with were suddenly bringing up concerns they never had before. It wasn't just normal office drama. Someone was making sure I looked bad. And I knew exactly who it was. Amber was trying to get me fired. He'd never been one to play fair, and this wasn't any different. The more I looked into the strange emails and the growing tension with my coworkers, the more it became clear that he was behind it all. I don't know how he managed it. Maybe he had some dirt on people at the office, or maybe he was just manipulating situations in a way that no one else could see, but it was working. Slowly but surely, my reputation was being ruined. I started noticing people whispering behind my back, giving me strange looks when I walked into the break room. I could feel the walls closing in on me. I tried confronting him a few times, but each time he would smile like everything was fine, pretend like nothing was happening. He acted like he was just another coworker, just trying to do his job like everyone else. But I knew the truth. He knew what he was doing. He was playing the long game, trying to ruin my life in a way that would keep me trapped in his web. I couldn't take it anymore. I wasn't going to let him do this to me again, not after everything we'd been through. I had already blocked his number, but now it was like I was stuck with him at work. He'd infiltrated my life, moved right into my personal space, and it felt like there was no way out. I don't know what happened to him after that. I reported everything to HR and pushed for him to be moved to a different department, but I'm not sure what exactly went down behind closed doors. All I know is that in the end, I walked away from that job. I couldn't stay there with him in my life. It was like a constant weight, a reminder of someone who didn't know how to let go. Sometimes I still wonder if he ever really let me go. I've been living in my new place for about 3 months, enjoying the peace and quiet that came with having my own space. It wasn't anything fancy, just a little one-bedroom apartment in a quiet part of town. After the breakup with Linda, I figured it was a good time for a fresh start. I'd spent weeks trying to rebuild my life, move past the drama, and forget the toxic mess we'd left behind. The whole situation had left me drained, but at least now I was starting to feel like I could breathe again. That was until one night when everything changed. I was sitting on my couch, mindlessly scrolling through my phone, when I heard a knock at the door. It wasn't a normal knock, though. It was quick, like someone was in a hurry, but hesitant at the same time. My first thought was that it was probably a neighbor or maybe someone from the building. But when I opened the door, nobody was standing there. Just a small, unmarked cardboard box sitting on the ground right in front of my doorstep. I looked around for a moment, expecting to see someone hiding or trying to play a prank on me, but there was no one in sight. It was completely silent, not a sound to be heard. I didn't know why, but I had a bad feeling. Maybe it was just the weirdness of it, or maybe it was the fact that it was late and I was alone. I almost left it there, but curiosity got the best of me, and I bent down to pick it up. The box felt heavier than I expected. I took it inside, setting it down on the coffee table. My heart was racing, and my mind kept going to dark places. Could it be something dangerous? Was it a gift from a friend? But no, this wasn't a gift. This felt wrong. I opened the box carefully, unsure of what I was about to find. At first, it looked like an ordinary package. There were no return addresses or labels, just a plain brown box. As I lifted the flaps, I felt a rush of dread. Inside, I found a stack of photographs. My stomach sank. The photos were all of me, pictures of me walking down the street, sitting at a cafe, and disturbingly even sleeping. There were several images of me walking to and from work, a few of me at the grocery store, one of me at the park, and a bunch of other shots I couldn't immediately place. But what hit me the hardest was the one of me asleep in my bed, taken from outside my window. I stared at the pictures, my breath hitching. How the hell is this possible? Who took these? I thought of all the times I'd walked home late at night when I was alone, completely unaware of anything watching me. The thought made my skin crawl. I couldn't stop looking at the photos. I turned them over, one by one, each more disturbing than the last. And then I saw it. At the bottom of the stack, there was a folded piece of paper. I opened it slowly, my hands shaking as I read the words scrawl on the page. I'll always be with you. Love, Linda. My blood ran cold. I dropped the letter. It fluttered to the floor. The reality hit me like a ton of bricks. This wasn't just a random prank or some kind of sick joke. This was her. Linda. Somehow she'd found me. Somehow she'd been following me, watching me, and I had no idea. I'd blocked her number months ago, changed my address, and even deleted my social media accounts. I'd done everything I could to make sure she wouldn't find me, but this was different. This was personal. She was still out there, and she'd clearly been keeping tabs on my every move. I felt trapped, like there was nowhere to run anymore. I had no idea how long she'd been doing this, or how many times she'd been outside my apartment, watching me when I had no idea. I thought about calling the police, but what could I even say? That my crazy ex had sent me pictures of my own life and left me a letter. Would they take me seriously? My mind raced. I couldn't stay here. I couldn't be alone with this anymore. I grabbed my phone and tried to block her number again, but it was pointless. It didn't matter how many times I changed my number, how many times I moved, she always seemed to find me. I wondered how she'd managed to get these pictures. Had she been hiding in the bushes outside my place? Had she been following me around during the day, too? The possibilities terrified me. The thought of her sitting somewhere, watching me without me knowing, made me feel sick. I started pacing around the apartment, trying to think of what to do next. Should I leave? Should I get a new place? Should I tell someone? But who would believe me? Who would understand the kind of terror I was feeling? It all seemed unreal, like a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. I went over the pictures again, hoping to find some clue, some hint about how she was able to pull this off. I thought about the things she'd said when we broke up, the promises that she would never let me go, that she'd always be there no matter what. I dismissed it as empty words back then, but now I wasn't so sure. As the night dragged on, I could barely focus on anything else. My mind kept racing back to those pictures, to the horrible realization that I was being stalked by someone I used to love. I knew I had to do something to protect myself, but I couldn't figure out what that was. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed up, locking all my windows, double-checking the locks on my doors, and peeking out from behind the curtains every now and then. Every little noise made my heart jump. Was someone out there? Was Linda waiting in the shadows, watching me again? I couldn't shake the feeling that she was. The next day, I called the police and showed them everything, photos, the letter, everything I had. They promised to look into it, but the reality of the situation was sinking in. Linda was out there, she was still watching, and I didn't know how to make her go away. All I could do was wait. I never thought breaking up with Natalie would lead to this. When we called it quits, it was messy, sure, but it was also necessary. She had been controlling, constantly checking up on me, and I couldn't breathe anymore. We fought all the time, and eventually I realized it wasn't healthy for either of us. So I ended things. I thought it would be the end of it. I was wrong. Months passed after the breakup. I moved on, met someone new, and life started to feel normal again. But then things began to happen, things I couldn't explain. It started with letters. At first, they were simple enough, the kind of thing anyone might expect after a breakup. Handwritten, the kind of letters you'd find in an old-school romance novel. At first, I thought it was just Natalie trying to reach out, maybe regretful or wanting closure. The first one I got said, I miss you. Just those 3 words, scribbled in a neat, delicate script, no return address, or any clues to where it came from. I figured it was just an odd, emotional thing she had to get off her chest. I didn't think much of it at first. But then the next one came. You were the best thing that ever happened to me. That one sent a weird chill down my spine. I had already moved on. I was with someone else now, someone who treated me right. So to get something like that felt unsettling, like she wasn't respecting the boundaries I had tried so hard to put in place. A few more came over the following weeks. It seemed to grow more personal, more intense. "You'll never forget me," one letter read. "You belong with me, not him." These weren't just love notes anymore. They felt like threats, like she was trying to draw me back into her world. I started to feel uneasy, but still no return address. It was like she was hiding behind some veil, like she didn't want to be found. I didn't know what to think, but I knew something wasn't right. I showed my boyfriend Alex the letters. He was concerned, and I could tell he was trying not to show how creeped up he was. I'd always told him about Natalie's controlling behavior, how she would never really let me go even after we ended things, but this was a whole different level. It was one thing to be sad, but these letters were getting obsessive. Then the one that really made my blood run cold arrived. It was different from the others. For one thing, it was sealed with lipstick. Deep red, like she had kissed it herself. I almost didn't want to open it. I stood there for a minute staring at the envelope, feeling the weight of it in my hands. I had this sinking feeling that I was about to find something that would push me over the edge. I carefully tore open the envelope, trying to ignore the pit in my stomach. Inside was a photo of me on a date with Alex. We were sitting in a cafe, laughing, clearly having a good time. And there, at the corner of the photo, was Natalie's handwriting. "I'm watching you." I froze. The photo was taken recently, and from the angle, it seemed like it had been snapped from across the street. How could she have gotten this picture? And how long had she been watching us? I started to panic. This wasn't just some weird love letter anymore. This was stalking. It was no longer about missing me. It was about control. I showed the photo to Alex, and he immediately went into protective mode. He wanted to call the police, but I felt so humiliated. I didn't want to make things worse by involving them, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. Alex stayed with me that night, even though I knew he had to work early the next morning. But I couldn't be alone. I couldn't shake the thought that someone was watching my every move. The worst part was, I had no idea how far Natalie was willing to go. The next few days were tense. I couldn't stop thinking about the photo, about how she had been watching me without my knowledge. Every time I stepped out of my apartment, I was paranoid. Was she around the corner? Was she in her car, waiting for me to walk by? It felt like I was being suffocated by fear, and I hated it. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get worse, I came home one night to find my front door slightly ajar. My heart stopped when I saw it. The lock was tampered with. The door was cracked open, but there were no signs of forced entry. I knew I'd locked it before leaving that morning. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I stepped cautiously inside. The apartment was exactly as I'd left it, except for one thing. There was another envelope sitting neatly on the kitchen counter. I didn't need to open it to know who it was from. The handwriting was unmistakable. My hands were shaking as I reached for it. This time, there was no lipstick, no fancy sealing. Just a plain envelope with one sentence written inside. "I'm so close now." I didn't even bother to read the rest. I couldn't. My mind was already spiraling, my heart racing. She was here. She was in my space. I had no idea how, but I knew she'd been inside my apartment. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. I immediately called Alex, my hands trembling, and he rushed over. The police came shortly after, but they couldn't do much. There was no proof she had actually entered my place, and nothing seemed to be missing. But the fear didn't leave. The next few weeks were a blur. I changed the locks, started carrying pepper spray with me, and began screening all my calls. I felt like a prisoner in my own life. Natalie wasn't just haunting me through letters anymore. She was everywhere. I couldn't trust anything. Every corner of my apartment, every street I walked down, felt like she was watching me. I still don't know how she managed to get so close, or how she knew every detail of my life. The letter stopped after that last one, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she was still out there somewhere, waiting. I was afraid to leave my apartment, afraid to go to work, afraid of what I have next. I don't know if I'll ever truly feel safe again. All I know is that sometimes when I'm out with Alex or walking around the city, I catch a glimpse of someone watching me from across the street, and my heart stops. It's always her, always Natalie, and I don't think she'll ever let me go. This is going to sound insane, and honestly, I still can't wrap my head around it. It was about 6 months after Freddie and I broke up. The breakup wasn't exactly clean or amicable, but I never thought it'd get this ugly. I figured he'd be like most exes and just fade into the background. I was wrong. He had other plans. I'd been working at this new office job for a couple of months by the time it happened. It was a decent place, nothing too crazy, just a normal 9 to 5 gig. I was starting to get comfortable making friends, learning the ropes, getting into the routine. Things were going well until one morning when I arrived at work and saw the first sign that things were about to get very weird. As soon as I got off the bus, I noticed something out of place. The sky was clear, and the street was busy with people walking to work, but my eyes kept being drawn to this giant billboard across the street. It wasn't the day before. It was one of those digital billboards, the ones that change images every few seconds. But this time, it wasn't an ad for a sale or some local event. It was an ad for me. I didn't even have to read the message. I could already tell from the layout and the font it was personal. The big letters across the top said F asterisk 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 INGCAER in bold, ugly red. Below that, there was a picture of me. It was a candid photo, one of those random ones someone might take when you're not expecting it. But I didn't recognize the picture at all. I didn't know when it was taken, where it was taken, or why it was being used. It was of me walking out of a coffee shop with my friend Sarah. Just a normal day. But Freddie had decided to make it look like something else. The rest of the message under the photo was even worse. It basically said I'd been lying, cheating, and that I didn't deserve the good things in life. It was full of accusations, nasty comments, and personal attacks, the kind of stuff that would make anyone feel like they were being dragged through the dirt in public. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at it, not sure if I was dreaming or if I was caught in some kind of sick prank. I had to read it a few times before it even started to sink in. But when it did, my heart dropped. I didn't even know what to think. How did he get this picture? How did he get a billboard? Why did he want to humiliate me like this? I didn't have time to process it because I had to get to work. I wasn't even sure how to react, so I just walked into the office, trying to pretend like I wasn't about to completely lose it. The whole day was a blur. People at work were constantly talking about the ad outside, pointing at it, making jokes. I could hear snippets of conversations in the hallway, people whispering about it. I had no idea what Freddie was thinking, but I had a horrible feeling that this was just the beginning. Every time I walked past a window, I could see it. Every time I stepped out for lunch, it was there looming over me. I felt like everyone at work was judging me now, like they thought I was some kind of monster or a liar. It was bad enough that Freddie had ruined my relationship with him, but now he was messing with my reputation at my job. When I finally got home that night, I broke. I couldn't stop crying. I felt humiliated, helpless, and honestly just scared. It wasn't just an ad anymore. It was like Freddie had made me the center of some sick public spectacle. He was trying to ruin my life in every possible way, and I didn't know how to stop it. The worst part was that I tried to reach out to him. I called him a few times, but he ignored my calls. I texted him. Nothing. I even emailed him, telling him how messed up this was, how I didn't deserve it. But nothing. No response. Then it got even weirder. The next day, the billboard wasn't the only thing. I started getting calls from random numbers, people who didn't leave voicemails but who kept calling. It was like Freddie had found a way to get into every part of my life. There were no breaks. I tried going to the police, hoping they'd be able to help. It took the report, but there wasn't much they could do. It said it wasn't illegal to rent a billboard and put whatever you want on it, as long as it didn't cross into hate speech or defamation. Technically, it was just a public ad, even if it was completely false and malicious. It felt like I was stuck in a nightmare, and the worst part was that Freddie wasn't done. I started getting packages delivered to my apartment. Nothing dangerous, just more weird, unsettling things. Old photos of me and him. Things that lost, things that had meant something to me. He was reminding me of everything we had, then twisting it into something ugly. He sent me flowers, too. They weren't romantic flowers, though. They were just dead flowers, wilted and gross, with notes attached that read, "You'll never escape me." It felt like he was following me, tracking my every move, just waiting for his next opportunity to mess with me. And then, one day, I walked out of my apartment to find another giant billboard. This time, right next to the one outside my office building. It had the same disgusting photo of me, but this time it said, "She Laid." She's AFRAUD. Don't trust her. It was getting harder to even leave my house. I started questioning everything. Was Freddie still watching me? Did he know where I was going, who I was with? How far would he go? He had already taken something private between us and turned it into a public circus, and it felt like it wasn't going to end. At some point, I just had to stop fighting. I had to keep going with my life. I got a lawyer involved to start working on getting the billboards removed, but Freddie kept up his game. He didn't care what I did, who I called, or how hard I tried to make it stop. He wanted me to know that no matter what, he could always mess with me. Even now, months later, I still see billboards like that in random places, and I can't shake the feeling that Freddie's still out there, waiting for his next chance to remind me that he's always watching. This whole thing started months ago, right after Kendra and I broke up. It was messy. Honestly, it always felt like something was off about our relationship, but I kept ignoring it. Looking back, I should have ended things a lot sooner. But it is what it is, I guess. I was over her, or so I thought. I was getting used to being single again. It felt nice, actually, having my own space, no one checking my phone or questioning me about stuff that didn't matter. I started dating someone new. Things were going well. My life was finally getting back to normal. Then one evening, I came home from work just like any other day. I pulled into the driveway, got out, and walked up to my front door. That's when I noticed it. The locks on the door were different. My heart dropped to my stomach, and I felt this cold rush of panic flood my chest. I stood there for a few seconds, staring at the door like it was mocking me. I had just moved in a few months earlier, so there was no reason for the locks to be changed. It didn't make sense. I pulled out my keys and tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. The lock was completely different from the one I had installed. At first, I thought maybe I'd just forgotten. Maybe I had the wrong key. I tried all the keys I had, but none of them worked. My hands were shaking now. I started to feel that familiar unease creeping up on me. I had seen this kind of behavior from Kendra before. When she didn't get her way, she pulled these insane moves to get control again. But changing the locks, that was next level. I knew something wasn't right, so I tried calling her. Her number went straight to voicemail like it always did these days. She had been ignoring my calls since we broke up, and it was starting to feel like she was just pretending like I didn't exist. But I also knew that if she was behind this, she wouldn't answer. She wasn't going to do things directly. After standing there for a while, I gave up and went around back, hoping maybe the back door would be unlocked. No luck. Everything was locked up tight. I started to panic. I was standing in the backyard of my own house, unable to get inside, not knowing what was going on. The door was mine, my stuff was in there, and I had every right to be inside, but it felt like someone was toying with me. I went back around to the front, sitting on the porch steps, trying to think through my options. Should I call a locksmith? Should I just break the window and get in that way? I wasn't even sure what to do anymore. It was getting late, and I didn't want to have to spend the night outside. Then, just as I was about to pull out my phone again and try calling her one more time, I saw it. There, sitting neatly on the doorstep, was a small box. I froze for a second, just staring at it. It was wrapped in plain brown paper, tied with string. There was no note, no indication of who it was from. My heart began to race. I thought about it for a second. Maybe it was a gift or just some random thing someone had left behind by mistake, but something told me that wasn't the case. I hesitated, then picked it up carefully, holding it like it might explode. I set it down on the steps and opened it slowly. Inside was a set of keys. They were old, worn, clearly not new, and there was a note attached to the top. My hands were shaking as I unfolded it. The handwriting was messy, but it was definitely Kendra's. "I'll always have a key to your heart," it said. That was all. No explanation. Just a weird, cryptic message. My stomach twisted into a knot. I wasn't sure if I should be scared, angry, or both. At that point, I knew. I knew it was her. She had somehow gotten access to my house and changed the locks. She was still trying to control me even after everything was over. It didn't make sense to me. I hadn't seen her in months, hadn't even talked to her. But she had somehow warmed her way back into my life doing this crazy stuff. I couldn't just sit there and take it. I called the police right away. When they showed up, they were pretty chill at first, thinking maybe it was a misunderstanding. But when I showed them the keys and the note, they started taking things more seriously. They said they'd check the area for any signs of her, but honestly, I knew they wouldn't find anything. Kendra wasn't dumb enough to leave a trail. The cops took a report, and I knew it wasn't going to be as easy as just calling the cops and waiting for them to handle it. She had been sneaky enough to get into my house without me noticing, so I wasn't going to just assume she'd leave me alone after this. I went back to the front door and stared at the new lock again. It felt like my whole world had just been upended. I was sitting outside my own house, locked out, trying to process the fact that my ex, someone who was supposed to be in the past, was still controlling me from behind the scenes. Over the next few days, I took action. I changed the locks again, added security cameras, and made sure everything was sealed up tight. But that didn't stop the dread I felt every time I came home. It felt like she was always watching, always just out of sight, waiting for her next move. The whole situation made me feel paranoid, like I couldn't trust anyone, not even the people I thought I could count on. It wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about the fact that Kendra had somehow found a way to sneak back into my life, even when I thought I had moved on. At the end of the day, it was a constant feeling of being trapped that haunted me. I didn't know what else she might do next, or how far she was willing to go. All I knew was that I couldn't let my guard down. I was locked out of my own house, but more than that, I was locked into this twisted game she was playing, and I didn't know if it was ever going to end. It all started months after I broke up with Mark. I thought I'd moved on. I had my own life, new friends, new hobbies, just trying to live my life without looking back. At first, it wasn't too bad. He respected the breakup, or at least, that's what I thought. Then I started seeing his car parked outside my house. It wasn't a one-time thing. It wasn't a coincidence. It became a pattern. At first, I tried to brush it off. Maybe he was driving by. I told myself it was nothing. But the car kept showing up like clockwork. Every evening when I got home from work, it was there. Sometimes it was parked a little too close to my driveway, other times across the street, just barely in my line of sight. After a few weeks, I couldn't pretend anymore. I knew I had to confront him. I was so sick of this. I had no idea what kind of game he was playing, but I wasn't about to let him keep creeping around my life. So one afternoon, I decided to follow him. I didn't know what I'd do once I caught up with him, but I knew I couldn't take the waiting any longer. I needed answers. I waited until I saw him pull out of his driveway and followed him at a distance. It wasn't hard to track him down. I knew his usual routes, and after a few turns, he took a left onto this quiet street I'd never been down before. There weren't any other cars around, just rows of houses with darkened windows. I slowed down, but I didn't want him to catch on. So I pulled over a couple of houses down and parked, my heart racing. I tried to keep calm, watching through the rearview mirror as Mark parked his car, not even a block from where I was. He turned off the engine, but instead of getting out, he just sat there. I couldn't see much of his face from where I was, but I could tell he wasn't going anywhere. Then, after what felt like forever, he did something that made my blood run cold. He looked in his rearview mirror like he was checking for me and then turned his head, meeting my eyes directly. He saw me. He knew I was there. I should have driven off right then. I should have just gone home and told myself it wasn't worth it, but I didn't. I stayed. The weirdest thing about that moment was that I wasn't scared yet. I was just confused. Why was he doing this? What did he want from me? I kept watching, frozen as Mark sat there, his car still parked in the same spot. He didn't seem angry or upset, but calm, almost like he was waiting for me to come to him. And that's exactly what I did. I got out of my car and walked down the street toward his. The closer I got, the more I felt like I was walking into something I couldn't undo. I should have turned around, but I kept walking. When I reached his car, he was still sitting there, hands on the wheel, staring straight ahead. For a second, I thought maybe he hadn't even seen me approach. But then he turned his head slowly to face me, and it was like the air shifted. His smile was small but unsettling. Mark didn't even try to pretend like he wasn't watching me. He didn't try to lie or cover up what he'd been doing. He just smiled that same cold smile. He told me something I'll never forget. I'll always be around. And that was it. No explanation. No apology. Just that. He didn't get out of the car. He didn't try to make me talk. He just sat there, waiting for me to respond. I didn't. I couldn't. I just stood there, staring at him, trying to make sense of everything. I could feel the anger start to rise in me, but more than anything, I was terrified. I wasn't sure if he was being serious, if this was some sick joke, or if he was just obsessed. All I knew was that it wasn't normal, and it wasn't okay. But instead of feeling brave or empowered, I felt paralyzed. I stood there for what felt like an eternity trying to figure out what to do. He didn't move. He just kept smiling, watching me like he was studying me. There were no words exchanged, just this eerie silence hanging between us. Finally, I snapped out of it. I was done. I turned at my heel and started walking back to my car. My hands were shaking as I fumbled for my keys, but I didn't look back. I could feel his eyes on my back, but I didn't dare give him the satisfaction of seeing me freak out. When I got into my car, I didn't waste a second. I slammed the door shut, started the engine, and drove off without looking back. For the next few days, I kept my eyes peeled for any sign of him, but I didn't see his car again. It felt like maybe he'd finally gotten the message, but I couldn't shake that feeling in my stomach. That nagging thought that he wasn't done. And I was right. A few weeks later, I was out with a friend and I saw it again. His car. Parked just a few houses down from mine. This time, though, I wasn't taking any chances. I called the police and told them everything. They were sympathetic, but honestly, I didn't feel like they were taking it seriously. They told me to just keep my distance and let them know if it happened again. Things got worse after that. Every time I thought I was free from his obsession, it would start up again. I'd be out of the store, and there he'd be parked across the street. At my work, a few blocks away, his car would be in the parking lot, just sitting there. I couldn't shake him. It felt like Mark had become this shadow in my life. No matter what I did, he was there watching, waiting. I started to feel like I was losing control of my own reality. And no matter how many times I told myself it was over, he always found a way to remind me that it wasn't. At that point, I realized something. Mark wasn't going to leave me alone. No matter what I did, he was going to keep showing up, like he had some right to be a part of my life again. And that was something I have to live with. Forever. I thought I was done with Jake. It had been months since we broke up, and for the first time in ages, I felt like I could breathe again. It was like this weight had been lifted off me, and I could start fresh. I moved into a new place, a cute little apartment I'd been eyeing for weeks. I was so excited to have my own space, away from the mess of our old relationship. It was supposed to be a new chapter, a fresh start. But that's when things started getting weird. At first, I told myself it was just me being paranoid. It was a new place after all. I didn't know how everything worked yet, and maybe the house was just settling or something. But little things started to happen, and I couldn't ignore them. It started with my keys. I'd come home from work, and they'd be in places I didn't remember putting them. On the kitchen counter when I always leave them by the door. On the bathroom sink when I know I left them on the couch. It wasn't huge, but it was enough to make me question my own memory. Maybe I was just forgetful. Maybe I had a weird habit I wasn't aware of. Then there were the lights. Randomly, they'd flicker, usually in the middle of the night. I'd be lying in bed, half asleep, and the lights would blink like someone was messing with the switches. I kept thinking it was just the wiring or maybe something with the power, but I couldn't shake this feeling that something wasn't right. And the noises. It was always when I was alone, like someone was walking around when no one else was there. I would hear footsteps in the hallway or creaks in the floorboards. I'd freeze, heart pounding in my chest, but when I went to check, there was nothing. Every time I tried to ignore it, the feeling that I wasn't truly alone grew stronger. Then one night, while I was cleaning, I found something that made everything click. I was organizing my closet and I noticed something odd. There was a part of the wall that seemed off, like it wasn't quite aligned with the rest of the closet. I had no idea how I missed it before, but there was a small hidden door in the corner behind my hanging clothes. It was barely visible, but it was definitely there. I don't know why I opened it. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe I just felt like something wasn't right, but I grabbed the nearest object I could find, a screwdriver, and pried open the tiny door. It was locked. Of course, I thought just my luck, but there was a key. I found it hidden under a loose floorboard in the corner of the closet. At that point, I wasn't thinking straight. I don't know why I didn't just call someone, ask for help. But I was alone, and for whatever reason, I felt compelled to open it. I twisted the key into the lock and pushed the door open. What I found inside made my stomach drop. It wasn't just an empty room. It was like a secret space that had been hidden there just for me. The walls were covered in pictures of me. Most of them were taken from inside my own apartment, but some were of me outside, walking down the street, sitting in my car. There were shots of me asleep on my couch, cooking in the kitchen, even lying in bed. I could feel the panic building in my chest as I stepped further into the room. The floor was covered in old clothes. Clothes that I had thrown away or hadn't seen in weeks. My old sweater. A pair of shoes I'd lost. How were they here? It hit me like a ton of bricks. Someone had been here. Someone had been inside my apartment while I was gone. I turned around and immediately froze. The walls were lined with more pictures. Some were photos of me. Some were things I'd done, things I hadn't even realized anyone would notice. It was like someone had been watching me for weeks, maybe months. The deeper I dug into the room, the more my stomach churned. How long had this been going on? How long had someone been hiding in my apartment, living in the shadows, watching me? The feeling of being violated, of having someone invade every part of my life, every little moment, hit me all at once. My mind raced, flashing back to all the little things that hadn't made sense. The missing keys, the flickering lights, the noises. It was all adding up. That's when I saw it. On the floor, tucked in the corner, was a notebook. It looked old, weathered, like it had been carried around for a long time. I picked it up, and the first page was a picture of me, one I hadn't seen before. It was taken through the window of my bedroom, me lying on my bed, completely unaware. Below the picture was a note. The handwriting was familiar, something about it triggered a memory I didn't want to relive. That's when it hit me, Jake. It had to be Jake. There was no one else who would have done this. It was his handwriting. The note had his name, a reminder of the twisted things he used to say. I should have known. He had been obsessed with me even after we broke up, and now here I was, standing in a secret room he made just for himself. A room full of my life, my memories, my every move, all captured without my knowledge. I could feel myself spiraling. The adrenaline, the horror, the disbelief. What was I supposed to do now? I wasn't safe. He had been living in my space, hiding in plain sight, making himself a part of my life without me even knowing. I grabbed the notebook and the pictures, locked the hidden door behind me, and ran out of the apartment. I didn't know where to go or what to do, but I knew one thing for sure: I couldn't go back there, not without answers, not without getting out of this nightmare. I haven't seen Jake since that day, but I still don't feel safe. I changed the locks, put up cameras, and even had the police come to investigate, but nothing has been the same. I can't shake the feeling that he's still out there, watching. He's always watching. And no matter how much I try to move on, I can never forget what I found in that hidden room. Things had been messy between us, and honestly, I thought I was finally free. I'd moved into a new place, started a new routine, and tried to bury all the drama we'd been through. But then, I started noticing something strange. At first, it was subtle. I'd walk into a store minding my own business, and I'd spot her face staring back at me from a magazine cover. It wasn't like I had any reason to be looking at magazines, but I couldn't avoid it. There she was, right in the middle of the aisle, her big, bright eyes smiling up at me. At first, I thought it was a weird coincidence, but then it started happening more often. I'd be watching TV, and there she was, a glimpse of her face in an ad. Or I'd scroll through my phone, and an online ad would pop up, featuring her in some bizarre promotion. I didn't get it. I didn't know what was happening, but it started to creep me out. It wasn't like she was a celebrity or anything, just some local girl with a decent Instagram following. But for whatever reason, her face kept popping up in the most random places. I'd turn a corner and catch her eyes in a shop window. It was like she was following me everywhere I went. I couldn't escape her. And then it got worse. One night, I was walking home from work, minding my own business, when I saw something out of the corner of my eye. It was dark out, and the streets were mostly empty. I didn't think much of it at first, but when I glanced back, I froze. In the shadows, there was someone standing just a few feet away from me. The figure was tall, maybe around my height, and they were wearing a mask. But it wasn't just any mask, it was my face. My heart stopped. I couldn't move. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing. The mask was made of some kind of pale material, and it looked so real, like it was made to look exactly like me. The skin tone, the features, everything was identical. But it wasn't me, it was a mask. And behind that mask, I saw her. Lila. I didn't recognize her at first. She was wearing my face, but there was something in her eyes that I couldn't ignore. It was her, Lila, standing there in the middle of the street, staring at me with this cold, twisted expression on her face. I wanted to scream, but my throat was dry. My body wouldn't move. She stood there for what felt like an eternity, not saying a word, not doing anything but looking at me with that same sickening blank expression. And then she moved. She didn't run after me, but her movements were deliberate, slow, like she was savoring every second of my horror. She walked past me, brushing up against my shoulder as she did. I could feel the coldness of her presence, the weight of the air around me, like she was trying to leave her mark on me. I could feel her eyes on my back as she disappeared into the shadows, but I couldn't move. I stood there, frozen, trying to process what just happened. I don't know how long I stood there, but when I finally snapped out of it, I ran. I ran home straight to my apartment, locked all the doors, and stayed up all night. My mind was racing and I couldn't stop shaking. Was it really her? Was I imagining it? How had she gotten a mask with my face? How had she made it so real? Over the next few days, things didn't get any better. In fact, they got worse. I couldn't go anywhere without seeing her face. Every store, every ad, every social media post. It was like she had put herself everywhere I looked. It was like she was trying to take over my life, piece by piece. I couldn't escape her. I'd go to work, and I'd walk past people who would stare at me like they knew something I didn't. It was like they could see it too, the way she was creeping into my life. I tried to block her on social media. I changed my number. I even considered moving again. But it didn't help. Her presence was everywhere. It wasn't just online. It was in the real world too. I'd see her standing outside my building. I'd catch glimpses of her in the reflection of windows as I walked by. It was like she was everywhere, always watching, always just a step behind me. One night, I was sitting at home scrolling through my phone when an alert popped up. A new video was tagged with my name. I opened it, half expecting some ridiculous meme or viral trend, but what I saw made my blood run cold. It was a video of me, shot from the street outside my apartment. I couldn't make out who was filming it at first, but I could see myself through the window. It was from the same angle as the picture of me that she'd taken with a mask on her face. The video panned slowly, focusing on me through the glass, while I sat in my living room, completely unaware of what was happening outside. Then the screen went black, and a single message appeared in bold letters. I'll always be here. You can't get away from me. I didn't know what to do anymore. I couldn't run from her. I couldn't hide. It was like she had become a part of me, following me everywhere I went, slipping into every crevice of my life. I had no peace. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't think straight. I don't know what she's planning or if this is just the beginning of something worse, but I can't escape it. Every time I think I'm alone, I wonder if she's out there, watching me, waiting for the right moment to remind me that I'll never be free from her. And now, every time I pass a reflection, I wonder if she's standing right behind me. Every time I see a face in the crowd, I can't help but look twice, half expecting it to be her wearing my face. It was months after I broke up with Chris, and I thought that was the end of it. Honestly, I was relieved. I thought the whole thing was behind me, the drama, the emotional roller coaster, all of it. But then one night I got home and something felt off. The door to my apartment was slightly ajar. I was exhausted after a long day at work, but my heart immediately started racing as I stood there in the hallway staring at the door. It wasn't wide open, but enough for me to feel like something was wrong. I pushed the door open slowly, half expecting to find everything trash or worse, someone inside. But everything looked normal. The couch was in its place. The kitchen was clean, no signs of struggle. Still, that sinking feeling in my stomach wouldn't go away. I locked the door behind me and checked every single room just to be sure, but there was nothing out of the ordinary. It was as if someone had been there, but had left before I arrived. I convinced myself I was being paranoid. Nothing was missing, and everything seemed fine. But then I opened the fridge to grab a bottle of water and saw it, a bottle of wine. I didn't buy wine. I didn't drink wine. It was one of those fancy-looking bottles, the kind people usually buy when they're hosting something, or when they're trying to impress someone. I stared at it for a few seconds, trying to convince myself that maybe I'd bought it on a whim. But I hadn't. I would have remembered, I was sure of it. I texted Chris. I had to ask. He was the only person who had a key to my place, and I didn't want to believe it, but my gut told me it was him. I asked if he'd been by my apartment, if he'd left the wine. He texted back almost immediately, denying it. He was adamant. No, he hadn't been there. He didn't even know about the wine. I tried to calm myself down, but the feeling in the pit of my stomach wouldn't go away. The next few days were fine. At least I thought they were. Until I started noticing strange things. It started small, like I was imagining things. I went to the coffee shop I always went to, no big deal. But then I saw him. Chris. He was sitting at one of the tables, reading something, just casually sipping his drink. It wasn't that weird, until I realized he was looking right at me. Not in a, oh, I didn't expect to see you here way. No, it was like he was waiting for me, watching me. He didn't smile, didn't wave. He just sat there staring. It freaked me out, so I left. I tried to brush it off as a coincidence, but then it happened again. The next day, I left work and walked to my car, and as I got closer, I saw him again. He was standing by the entrance of the building across the street, looking right at me. His face was neutral, almost too calm. At that point, I was pretty sure I was losing my mind. I couldn't understand why he was suddenly popping up everywhere I went, but it was starting to feel like he was following me. I tried not to give in to the paranoia, but it was hard to ignore. Every time I turned around, there he was. Not enough to confront me directly, but enough to make me feel like I was being watched. It was when I started seeing him on my way home that I really started to lose it. I drive down the same stretch of road every day, and for the past few days, his car was always parked on the same corner, like he was waiting for me to pass by. I tried to tell myself it was a coincidence again, but deep down I knew it wasn't. He knew my routine. He knew where I went when I went, and it felt like he was just waiting for the right moment to pop up. It was getting harder to pretend it was all in my head. One afternoon, I decided to confront him. I texted him and asked if we could meet. I needed answers. He agreed, and we set up a time at a cafe near my apartment. I walked in, and as soon as I spotted him sitting at the corner booth, I felt my heart drop. It wasn't just the fact that I was seeing him again. It was the way he looked. There was no guilt in his eyes, no remorse. It was like he was pretending nothing was wrong, like this whole thing was normal. I sat down across from him, my hands shaking, and asked why he was showing up everywhere I went. Why he was following me, why he was acting like this. He looked at me for a moment, calm as ever, and then he said something that made my blood run cold. I'm not following you. I'm just making sure you're okay. He said it so casually, like it was no big deal. I could feel the tension rising in my chest, but I didn't back down. I asked him flat out if he had been at my apartment that night, if he had put the wine in my fridge. He paused. His expression flickered for just a second, and then he said, I told you I haven't been there. I wouldn't do that. But I could tell he was lying. I knew it. The worst part, as I left the cafe, I felt a chill in the air. It wasn't the kind of chill that comes from cold weather. It was a deep, uncomfortable feeling that crawled under my skin. I couldn't shake it. That night, I locked all my windows and doors, and I stayed awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, hoping I was just being paranoid. But I wasn't. The next morning, when I left for work, I found his car parked across the street again, just like before. This time, I could see him through the windshield, just sitting there staring at my apartment. I don't know how long he had been there, but I knew something wasn't right. And the worst part, I couldn't stop myself from feeling like he was always going to be there, watching, waiting. I met Sam at a party a few years ago, and at first, it felt like fate. You know that feeling when you meet someone and it's like you just click. That was us. We spent the whole night talking, laughing, and getting to know each other. He was charming, funny, and just seemed so perfect. But as time went on, things started to shift. Little by little, I'd begin noticing some things that made me feel uneasy. At first, it was small stuff, like how he'd get really upset if I didn't text back right away, or how he'd show up uninvited to places I went. But over time, it got worse. He became possessive. If I went out with friends, he would get mad, not outright, but in a way that made me feel guilty. He'd say things like, I thought we were going to hang out tonight. Why'd you go with him? Or you never spend time with me anymore. It wasn't normal. It was like I was walking on eggshells all the time, trying not to upset him. But at the same time, I could feel myself slipping away from who I was. It wasn't just the guilt trips. Sam started controlling things. He'd make decisions for me without asking, like where we went for dinner, what movies we watch, even who I hung out with. And I started to lose myself. I didn't even realize it at first. I wasn't making my own choices anymore. He was doing it for me. It didn't take long for me to see that this wasn't healthy, so I ended it. I thought that would be the end of it, that I could just move on and leave him behind. But boy, was I wrong. A few months after we broke up, I moved into a new apartment. I was starting fresh, feeling hopeful about moving on with my life. It was a small, cozy place on the third floor, and I loved it. I was excited to settle in and just enjoy my new independence. One day, I decided to visit my friend who lived on the same floor as my old apartment. We had kept in touch, and she'd invited me over to hang out. So I grabbed my stuff and headed over to her place. As soon as I stepped off the elevator, I felt this weird twinge of discomfort. I don't know why, it was just one of those things that hit me out of nowhere. But I shook it off, brushed the feeling away, and walked to her door. When I knocked, I wasn't expecting the person who opened it. It was Sam. I froze. At first, I thought I was seeing things. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. But no, it was definitely him. He was standing there, looking at me with this calm, almost satisfied expression on his face. "Hey," he said, as if seeing me was the most normal thing in the world. I didn't know what to do. I was already on edge from seeing him after so long. But then something hit me even harder. He was standing there in my old apartment, the apartment I had moved out of just a few months ago. "What are you doing here?" I asked, still in shock. Sam just shrugged, casually, as if it wasn't a big deal. "I moved in here," he said, his voice calm. "It's a great place, and I thought it'd be good to be close to you." That's when it hit me. I looked around. Everything about the place felt off. Familiar, but in a way that made my stomach turn. The same couch was in the same spot where I had placed it. The same rug, the same throw pillows. Everything was exactly the way it had been when I lived there. The pictures I had on the walls, the little trinkets on the shelves, they were all in the same place. This wasn't just a coincidence. He had mimicked my apartment, my old life. He had recreated it down to the smallest detail. It wasn't just the apartment either. He'd moved in to be close to me, but it felt like he'd never really left. He had kept tabs on me all along, and now he was literally living in the space I had been in, taking it over. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. It felt like my mind was racing, but I couldn't process what was happening. Sam standing there in my old place, smiling like it was nothing. I looked past him and saw my old things, my old life, sitting there like he was trying to hold on to it, trying to hold on to me. I asked him how he found the place, but the answer didn't make sense. He said he'd just looked around for somewhere on the same floor. But the thing is, the apartment had been rented out to me by my old landlord, and I had moved in just a few days after it had become available. There was no way he could have known about it unless he was actively looking for it, unless he had been looking for it all along. I felt trapped. Sam had always known how to make me feel like I couldn't escape, but this was something else. He had been planning this. He had been waiting for me to come back into his life, and now here he was, sitting in the same apartment, in the exact same layout, recreating my past. It wasn't just an apartment anymore. It was a replica of my life, and he was in it. I stood there, too stunned to speak, and Sam just kept looking at me like this was something normal, like this was just the next step in his plan. I had broken up with him, tried to start fresh, but in his mind I was still his. I had always been his, and now he was getting closer. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to get out of there or what to say. All I knew was that he had found a way to wedge himself back into my life, and now he was living in the exact place where I had once been. It wasn't just my old apartment, it was my life. I left without saying anything else. I couldn't stay there. As I walked back down the hall, I couldn't shake the feeling that Sam was watching me, that he'd always been watching me even when I thought he was gone. And for the first time since we broke up, I realized that Sam had never really let me go. He was still there, waiting, stalking the shadows of my life, ready to take the next step. So I thought I had it all figured out. I broke up with Chris months ago after realizing how messed up everything had become. At first, I thought things were going fine, but over time, I started noticing his manipulative and emotionally abusive behavior. He'd twist my words, make me feel like I was the one at fault for everything that went wrong, and I just felt drained all the time. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I ended things, and I moved into a new apartment, far away from the neighborhood we used to live in. I was finally free, or so I thought. For a while, things were good. I was adjusting to the new place and the new rhythm of life. I started enjoying the peace and quiet, the fresh start. The apartment wasn't anything fancy, but it was mine, and it felt like a safe space. It had these big windows that let in so much light, and the quiet was so different from the constant noise of the old place we had shared. I thought I was in the clear. But then, about a month after I moved in, things started to get weird. It was a Sunday night, and I'd been staying up late watching Netflix. Nothing out of the ordinary. I had just turned off the TV and was about to fall asleep when I heard it. The tapping. At first, I thought it was just the wind. Maybe something outside was knocking against the window. I tried to ignore it, rolled over, and pulled the covers up. But then it happened again. A soft tap, tap, tap. And this time, it didn't sound like it was coming from the window at all. It was coming from the closet. My heart dropped. I lay there frozen for a minute, straining to listen. It was dead quiet except for that sound. Tap, tap, tap. I could feel my pulse picking up. I tried to convince myself it was just some weird noise, maybe the pipes or something, but the more I thought about it, the more I knew something wasn't right. The apartment was still new to me, but I was pretty sure there wasn't anything inside the closet that could make that kind of noise, and it definitely wasn't the wind. I forced myself to sit up. My mind was racing. Should I call someone? Should I check it out? I was panicking, but I couldn't stay in bed just wondering what was going on. Slowly, I got out of bed, my feet feeling like they were dragging through thick mud. I could hear my breathing, shallow and fast, as I walked toward the closet door. It felt like I was walking through a dream, like nothing was real. When I reached the closet, I could feel the fear creeping up my spine. I didn't know what I was expecting, but part of me just knew something was off. I stood there, hand hovering over the doorknob, trying to convince myself I was just being paranoid. Maybe it was a mouse. Maybe it was the building settling. But then the tapping happened again. Tap, tap, tap. Without thinking, I threw open the door. The closet was dark. Too dark. It took a second for my eyes to adjust. I quickly flipped the light on, scanning the shelves, the floor, and the hanging clothes. Nothing. There was nothing there. I stared for a while, trying to make sense of it. Maybe it was just some noise that had gotten into my head. I heard of people getting spooked by strange sounds, but this felt different. The tapping wasn't random. It was deliberate. But there was no one in the closet, no hidden creatures or anything out of place. I closed the door, feeling embarrassed but still unsettled. I told myself I was overthinking it, that I was just stressed out and tired from the move. I tried to go back to bed, but my mind wouldn't let go of what had just happened. I kept telling myself it was nothing. But the truth was, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The next morning, I went about my day like usual, trying to brush off the weirdness of the night. But something still felt off. I kept thinking about it, replaying the tapping over and over in my mind. I didn't want to admit it, but I was scared. I thought it could be just a random freaky thing, but it kept eating at me. Something was off about that sound. A few days later, I woke up again in the middle of the night. This time, I wasn't even asleep when I heard it. The tapping. It was louder this time, more urgent. I bolted upright in bed, my heart pounding. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't a building settling. It was coming from the closet again. I was terrified. My body felt like it was paralyzed. I couldn't even move at first. All I could hear was the sound of my breath and that tapping. Tap, tap, tap. I grabbed my phone off the nightstand and tried to call someone. Anyone, but I couldn't bring myself to dial the number. I just needed to check it again, to make sure I wasn't going crazy. This time, when I opened the closet door, it felt different, like something was waiting for me. The light flickered on. I scanned the closet again, more quickly this time, but there was still nothing there. But this time, there was something new. Something that hadn't been there before. A small folded piece of paper was tucked under the clothes. My hands shook as I reached for it. I opened it up, and my heart dropped. It was a note, written in messy handwriting. But the weird part wasn't the handwriting. It was the words. It said, "I'm closer than you think." I froze. My mind couldn't process it. I felt like the world was spinning. My hands were shaking, and I couldn't breathe. There was no way this was happening. It didn't make sense. I had moved. I was far away from Chris. There was no way he could have gotten in here. But the note, it was real. And the tapping, it was real. I slammed the closet door shut, my heart racing. I backed away from it, unsure of what to do next. The note felt like a warning. But who would do something like this? Why? The feeling of being watched settled in again, the paranoia creeping back. But this time it was deeper. I wasn't just paranoid anymore. I was sure someone had been inside my apartment. Someone knew my fears. Someone was still haunting me even after I tried to escape. And that's when it hit me. Chris. Somehow, he found a way to stay in my life, even though I had tried to leave him behind. I didn't know what he wanted, but I knew it wasn't going to stop. Not until I figured it out. Not until I knew who was watching me from behind the door.